All right, close your eyes for just a second. Imagine stepping out of a time machine right into the blinding sunlight of the ancient world. You're not looking at some dusty ruins or faded statues, right? You are standing right in the middle of the vibrant, bustling, and honestly incredibly noisy streets of 600 BC Babylon. This was the largest, richest, and arguably the most advanced city on the entire planet at the time. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to take a walk through the reality of a lost, mud brick metropolis that somehow, wildly enough, still dictates the way you and I live our daily lives.
To really drop us into that blinding blue, awe-inspiring reality, I love how one modern observer perfectly put it. They said, "It feels like I'm walking into a myth that's waking up on camera today. The Ishtar Gate is so blue it looks like a slice of sky on Earth." I mean, how great is that? This wasn't just some mythical place from a storybook. It was a living, breathing machine of pure human ingenuity.
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, Gateway to Ancient Babylon.
So right here we're looking at the reconstructed Ishtar Gate at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. This was painstakingly built from the original excavated fragments. King Nebuchadnezzar II had this commissioned around 575 BC, and it towered over 38 feet high. But Nan, it's that color that really grabs you, isn't it? It's completely covered in these brilliant blue glazed bricks, and that was totally on purpose. It was designed specifically to imitate lapis lazuli, which was a super highly prized semi-precious stone back then. Imagine being a visitor arriving at the city. You were meant to feel completely intimidated by the sheer wealth and power of the empire, while at the very same time, the gate was acting as this massive, magical ward protecting the city inside.
Now, what's really interesting here is the incredible detail on these raised relief animals decorating the walls, like this one. This is an aurochs, an extinct type of wild cattle. All along the gate and the processional way leading up to it, these guys were accompanied by hundreds of lions and mythical dragons. And they literally projected out from the wall into your physical space. They were quite literally designed to awe friends and terrify enemies. But it makes you wonder, how on earth did they achieve that brilliant blue in a world that didn't have synthetic dyes?
Well, they used a material called frit. These Babylonian craftspeople would melt down a mixture of silica, plant ash, and minerals, like cobalt, cool it down, and then grind it into a fine powder to create these brilliant glazes. But here's the kicker. To the Babylonians, this wasn't just chemistry. This was straight-up alchemy and magic. They seriously believed that by taking earth and minerals and transforming them into these brilliant glass-like surfaces, they were creating materials that rivaled the power of naturally occurring sacred stones. So they weren't just decorating, they were literally building divine power right into the city walls.
Moving right along to Section 2, Engineering a Desert Oasis. Now, unlike the super predictable Nile River over in Egypt, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were violent. They flooded totally unpredictably. Too much water, and boom, your field's drowned. Too little, you starve. It was a harsh reality. So the Babylonians survived by engineering this incredibly complex system of canals, dikes, and levees. They used these genius chain pumps and shadoofs, which are basically a chain of buckets hooked up to a pulley system, to physically lift the water up from the river and distribute it across the dry plains. They essentially took unpredictable, violent chaos and turned it into controlled, gravity-fed life.
And this brilliantly illustrates their absolute mastery over water. I mean, you've probably heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Historically speaking, they might be a myth, or actually scratch that, some historians think they might have actually been located in the rival city of Nineveh. But regardless of where they were, the engineering described in those legends was entirely real for the Babylonians. They built these complex cooling networks using flowing water and shade that could literally drop ambient temperatures by up to 20 degrees. Whether it was for some legendary terraced garden or just their daily urban infrastructure, their ability to manipulate water was absolutely second to none.
All right, let's transition to Section 3, Fashion, Trade, and Contracts.
If you were walking around shopping in the local market, you'd quickly realize that the Babylonians were completely obsessed with precision. They measured absolutely everything: weight, volume, time, you name it, and they did it using a base 60 mathematical system. Just take a look at these measurements. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. Does that look familiar to you? Yeah, the mathematics developed by Babylonian priests and merchants 2,600 years ago still invisibly dictate our daily routines today. I mean, right down to the literal watch on your wrist. It's crazy.
So the crucial point is, in a city that's this obsessed with trade and precision, you really need a rock-solid way to make binding agreements. Enter the cylinder seal. These were intricate little stone cylinders carved with totally unique designs.
Whenever a scribe wrote out a contract on a wet clay tablet, you would roll your personal cylinder right across the bottom, leaving a raised impression. Think of it as the ancient world's digital signature. It was a highly secure, totally unique, and verifiable way to sign legal contracts for loans, marriages, or selling property right there in the bustling markets.
And just walking through that market, the sensory details would have been completely overwhelming. You've got men and women brushing past you wearing these woolen tunics and long fringed robes. Over in the corner, you might spot a priest wearing a sacred draped goatskin. And here's a fun fact. If you wanted to buy something, you weren't handing over any coins, because coins literally hadn't been invented yet. Instead, you'd pay by weighing out tiny pieces of silver on a balance scale. Oh, and if you were too poor to afford one of those fancy carved cylinder seals we just talked about, no problem. You'd simply press your fingernail into the wet clay, a literal biological signature.
Which brings us to Section 4, Dining in the Empire.
Now, this brings up a really fascinating question. How do we actually know what a Babylonian meal tasted like? Well, sitting over in the Yale Babylonian Collection are these 4 clay tablets dating back 4,000 years. And for decades, scholars just assumed they were really boring medical text. But upon closer inspection, it turns out they are the world's oldest known cookbooks. No joke, they are actual step-by-step culinary recipes. And modern researchers and chefs have actually recreated these exact dishes. Imagine sitting down to this rich, super aromatic stew. It's made with lamb or mutton, red beets, and just heavily flavored with the allium family. So we're talking lots of onions, leeks, and garlic. Then it gets thickened and enriched with rendered sheep's tail fat. Sounds intense, right? And to wash it all down, you're actually not drinking wine. You were drinking sour beer. In Mesopotamia, sour beer, not water or wine, was the absolute foundational, safe, everyday drink of the common people.
Okay, let's move on to Section 5, the Akitu New Year.
Let's see how this all builds, because the springtime Akitu festival wasn't just a big party. It was a strict, highly political, legal contract designed to legitimize the king's power. First off, the king is literally, ritually humiliated by the high priest just to publicly show his submission to the gods. Then comes the most crucial moment, Kwate Baal Sabatum, grasping the hand of the god Marduk. By physically holding the hand of the divine statue, the king is renewing his contract to rule for another year. Finally, the destinies for the year are decreed, and a massive public parade kicks off. If the king didn't show up, or if the statue of the god was missing or stolen, the entire festival was canceled, and the king's legitimacy was thrown into serious doubt.
All these intense political and religious rituals culminated right here at the Etemenanke Ziggurat. This was a massive, 7-tiered mud brick temple that towered perhaps 300 feet into the air. It was seen as the actual earthly dwelling of the patron god, Marduk. But you know, it wasn't just a temple. Up at the very top of this ziggurat, priests were meticulously watching the stars. They were tracking the movements of the planets to predict the future and decreed those destinies we just talked about. And in doing so, they pretty much laid the absolute groundwork for modern mathematics and astronomy.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 6, Babylon's Enduring Modern Legacy.
It has been roughly 2,600 years since Babylon was at the absolute height of its power, back in 600 BC. That is an immense, almost unfathomable gulf of time. Yet because they wrote everything down on wet clay, their records have outlasted parchment, they've outlasted papyrus, and honestly, they'll probably outlast our own digital hard drives. Millions of baked clay tablets have perfectly preserved their laws, their myths, their grocery receipts, and their math. We can sit here and read their exact words today.
They literally built a paradise out of mud and water. And in doing so, they gave us the 60-minute hour, the earliest astronomy, and the very foundations of written law. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to end on. When you look around at our modern world today, a world made of plastics, steel, and digital servers, what will our civilization leave behind that will last as long and speak as clearly as Babylon's hardened mud? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll see you on the next one.